The morning air at Buckingham Palace carried an unusual tension as Commander Sarah Mitchell walked briskly through the marble corridors. Her polished boots echoed against the ornate floors while she clutched a sealed envelope marked with the royal crest. After 15 years of distinguished service in the Royal Protection Unit, Sarah had never encountered a situation quite like this one. The previous evening's emergency meeting with the King's private secretary had been brief but shocking. Queen Camilla's recent behavior had crossed several red lines that the palace could no longer ignore. The decision had been made at the highest levels. And now Sarah faced the uncomfortable task of executing orders that would send shockwaves through the royal establishment. Queen Camilla sat in her private sitting room, sipping Earl Grey tea while reviewing her schedule for the week. She had grown comfortable in her role, perhaps too comfortable according to some palace insiders. Her relationship with certain staff members had become increasingly strained, particularly after she had dismissed 3 longtime servants without consulting the king. The final straw came when security cameras captured her attempting to access confidential royal correspondence meant only for senior working royals. Commander Mitchell knocked firmly on the ornate door before entering. Camilla barely looked up from her teacup, assuming this was another routine security briefing. The casual dismissal in her posture would soon transform into something far different. Your Majesty, I need to discuss some immediate changes to your security arrangements, Sarah began. Her voice steady but formal, Camilla finally raised her eyes, noting the commander's unusually serious demeanor. What sort of changes? I wasn't informed of any modifications to my schedule. Sarah opened the sealed envelope and withdrew the official document. Effective immediately, your access to certain areas of all royal residences is being restricted. Your current protection team is being reassigned to other duties. The teacup rattled against its saucer as Camilla set it down with force. I beg your pardon? On whose authority? This comes directly from the King's office, Your Majesty. With full consultation from the Prince of Wales, Sarah's training kept her voice level despite the growing storm. She could see building in the Queen's expression. Camilla rose from her chair, her face flushing with indignation. This is absolutely preposterous. I am the Queen Consort. I have every right to access any part of these palaces. The decision has been made due to recent security concerns and breaches of protocol. Sarah continued, reading from the official document. Your protection detail will be reduced and restructured. Inspector Davies and Sergeant Thompson are being transferred to other assignments immediately. The mention of her longtime bodyguards hit Camilla like a physical blow. Inspector Davies had been with her for over 8 years, and Sergeant Thompson had become almost like family. The realization that this wasn't just a minor adjustment but a complete overhaul began to sink in. Where exactly am I being restricted from? Camilla demanded, moving closer to the commander. The King's private study, the royal archives, the diplomatic correspondence rooms, and several administrative offices. Additionally, access to Windsor Castle's private quarters will require advance approval. Camilla's laugh was sharp and bitter. And I suppose Catherine gets to waltz around wherever she pleases? Sarah hesitated for just a moment. The Princess of Wales will be receiving enhanced security coverage due to increased public duties and international travel requirements. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla understood immediately what wasn't being said directly. Not only was she being stripped of access and security, but those very resources were being redirected to Catherine. The woman who had never quite accepted her place in the royal hierarchy was being elevated while Camilla was being diminished. I want to speak to my husband immediately, Camilla said, reaching for the phone on her desk. His Majesty is aware of these arrangements and has approved them, Sarah replied gently. He's currently in meetings with the Commonwealth representatives and won't be available until this evening. Camilla's hand froze over the telephone. The king knew. He had known and approved this humiliation without even discussing it with her first. The betrayal cut deeper than the actual restrictions. When does this take effect? She asked quietly, her earlier bluster replaced by a cold realization of her changed circumstances. The new arrangements began at 6 o'clock this morning. Your replacement protection officer, Constable Williams, is waiting outside to brief you on the modified protocols. As if on cue, a young officer appeared in the doorway. He looked nervous, clearly understanding the delicate nature of his new assignment. Camilla looked from Sarah to the new constable, seeing the dramatic reduction in her security status made manifest in human form. "Inspector Davies?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "It's been assigned to Princess Catherine's detail as of this morning," Sarah confirmed. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Not only were her trusted protectors being taken away, they were being given to her stepdaughter-in-law. The woman who had seamlessly transitioned from commoner to future queen, while Camilla still felt like she was fighting for acceptance after all these years. Camilla walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, watching the morning activities continue as if her world hadn't just shifted dramatically. Gardeners tended to the roses, tourists gathered at the gates, and life went on while her status within these walls had fundamentally changed. "Will there be anything else, Your Majesty?" Sarah asked. Preparing to leave, Camilla turned back to face her, and the commander was surprised to see not anger but calculation in the Queen's eyes. "Just one question, Commander. Who initiated the security review that led to these changes?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "That information is classified, Your Majesty." But Camilla had already seen the answer in the commander's hesitation. This hadn't come from the king alone. Someone had been documenting her activities, building a case, and presenting evidence that forced the king's hand. Someone who stood to benefit from Camilla's reduced influence and access. As Commander Mitchell left the room, Camilla remained by the window, her mind already working on her next moves. If someone wanted to play palace politics, she was more than ready to engage. The game was far from over. Princess Catherine adjusted her posture as she walked through the corridors of Kensington Palace, unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. The morning had started routinely with breakfast with William and the children, followed by a briefing about her upcoming charity engagements. She had no idea that across London, Queen Camilla was discovering her world had been turned upside down. Inspector Davies stood at attention outside Catherine's private office, still processing his sudden reassignment. After 8 years protecting the Queen Consort, he found himself thrust into an entirely different dynamic. The Princess of Wales had always been polite during their previous interactions, but he knew this transition would require careful navigation. "Inspector Davies," Catherine said with surprise as she approached her office. "I wasn't expecting to see you here today, Your Royal Highness. I've been reassigned to your protection detail as of this morning," Davies replied formally. "I'll be working alongside your existing team to provide enhanced security coverage." Catherine paused, her hand on the door handle. Enhanced security usually meant increased threats or expanded responsibilities. "Has something happened that I should be aware of?" Before Davies could respond, Catherine's private secretary, Amanda Morrison, appeared with a folder of urgent communications. "Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss some significant changes to your schedule and security protocols." Inside the office, Amanda spread several documents across Catherine's desk while Inspector Davies remained standing by the door. The papers detailed a massive expansion of Catherine's royal duties, including solo international visits that had previously been handled by more senior royals. "The palace has fast-tracked your UNESCO appointment," Amanda explained. Referring to Catherine's upcoming role as a special ambassador, "You'll be traveling to Geneva next week, then 2-3 African nations the following month." Catherine studied the itinerary, noting the complexity and importance of these assignments. These seemed like duties that would typically go to more senior working royals. Amanda exchanged a meaningful glance with Inspector Davies before continuing. "There have been some reorganizations within the family's working arrangements. You're being positioned to take on a more prominent role in international relations." The careful phrasing didn't escape Catherine's notice. In royal speak, reorganizations usually meant someone had fallen out of favor. She had spent enough years in this family to read between the lines. "Where is this enhanced security team coming from?" Catherine asked, looking directly at Inspector Davies. "Sergeant Thompson will be joining us this afternoon, Your Royal Highness," Davies replied. "We're implementing the highest level of protection protocols for your upcoming engagements." Catherine recognized both names immediately. These were Camilla's longtime protectors, officers who had been with the Queen Consort through every major event and appearance. Their sudden transfer to her detail spoke volumes about the palace's shifting priorities. Her phone buzzed with a text message from William. Need to talk when you have a moment. Some family developments you should know about. Catherine set the phone down, understanding that this morning's changes were part of something much larger. Amanda, what exactly has happened with the Queen Consort's arrangements? Amanda hesitated before responding. Her Majesty's access to certain palace areas has been restricted due to security concerns. The King approved a comprehensive review of all working royals' protocols. The diplomatic language couldn't hide the reality. Camilla had been demoted. Catherine was receiving the resources and responsibilities that were being stripped away from her stepmother-in-law. The implications were staggering. I need to speak with my husband, Catherine said firmly. He's currently in meetings with his father and the private secretaries, Amanda replied. The situation is being handled at the highest levels. Catherine walked to her window, processing the morning's revelations. She had always known that palace politics could be brutal, but this felt different. This was a fundamental reshuffling of power within the royal family, and she was being positioned as both beneficiary and potential target. Inspector Davies cleared his throat respectfully. Your Royal Highness, if I may, this transition will require some adjustments for all of us. My priority is your safety and security, regardless of previous assignments. Catherine appreciated his professionalism, but she also understood the awkward position he was in. Inspector, I hope you know that I had nothing to do with these changes. I wasn't consulted about any reassignments. Of course, Your Royal Highness. We understand that these decisions are made well above our level. But even as she said it, Catherine wondered if Camilla would believe that. The timing seemed too convenient, too perfectly aligned with Catherine's rising profile and Camilla's recent difficulties. Someone had orchestrated this carefully, and Catherine feared she would be seen as the primary beneficiary, and therefore, the likely architect, Amanda, presented another document that made Catherine's breath catch. You're also being given access to the royal archives for your historical research projects, and clearance for the diplomatic correspondence rooms. These were privileges that had been restricted to only the most senior royals. The Queen Consort had been fighting for similar access for years, and now Catherine was being granted it as part of her expanded role. This is a trap, Catherine said quietly, more to herself than to the others in the room, Your Royal Highness. Amanda asked. Catherine shook her head, realizing she had spoken aloud. Nothing. Just thinking through the implications of these changes. But internally, Catherine understood exactly what was happening. By elevating her at Camilla's expense, the palace was creating an inevitable conflict. Camilla would see Catherine as the person who had stolen her position, her security team, and her access. The fact that Catherine hadn't asked for any of these changes would be irrelevant. Her phone rang. She saw William's name on the display. I need to take this, she told the others, who discreetly stepped outside. Bad. I'm sure you've heard about the morning's developments, William said without preamble. I'm still processing it all. Your stepmother's people are now my people, and her responsibilities are becoming mine. This looks like I orchestrated a palace coup. William's sigh was audible through the phone. The king made these decisions based on security reports and advice from his private secretary. Neither of us was consulted beforehand, but we're the ones who benefit most from Camilla's downfall, Catherine pointed out. She's not going to see this as an administrative decision. She's going to see this as a personal attack orchestrated by us. Then we need to be very careful about how we handle the next few days, William replied. Because you're right. This puts us directly in the line of fire. Catherine looked out at the palace gardens, where she could see increased security patrols that hadn't been there the day before. The enhanced protection was already visible, along with everything that came with her elevated status. William, what aren't you telling me about why this happened so suddenly? There was a long pause before he answered. Camilla was caught trying to access classified correspondence about the succession planning. The king had no choice but to act immediately. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Catherine. This wasn't just about security breaches or protocol violations. This was about Camilla overstepping boundaries related to the future of the monarchy itself. And now, Catherine found herself thrust into the center of a royal power struggle that threatened to tear the family apart. King Charles stood in his private study at Buckingham Palace, staring at the succession planning documents that had triggered the morning's dramatic events. His hands trembled slightly as he held the confidential papers that Camilla had been discovered reading without authorization. The betrayal cut deeper than any political crisis he had faced as monarch. The documents detailed contingency plans for various scenarios involving the throne, including provisions for regency should Charles become incapacitated. More damaging was Camilla's handwritten notes in the margins, suggesting changes that would expand her role and influence in ways that contradicted centuries of constitutional precedent. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, entered the study with another folder of urgent correspondence. Your Majesty, we've received responses from the other working royals regarding this morning's arrangements. Charles set down the succession documents and accepted the new folder. What's the temperature? Princess Anne supports your decision completely. She's offered to take on additional duties during the transition. The Duke of Edinburgh has requested a private meeting with you this afternoon. Charles nodded, knowing that Edward's diplomatic nature would lead him to seek understanding rather than taking sides. And William? The Prince of Wales is concerned about the impact on Princess Catherine. He feels she's being placed in an impossible position. This gave Charles pause. In his focus on containing Camilla's overreach, he hadn't fully considered how the reshuffling would affect his daughter-in-law. Catherine had always maintained a respectful distance from palace politics, and now she was being thrust into the center of a family crisis. Perhaps I should speak with Catherine directly, Charles mused. That might be wise, Your Majesty. There are already rumors circulating among the staff about the reasons for these changes. Charles walked to his window, observing the increased security measures that had been implemented overnight. The sight of additional guards reminded him of the broader implications of his decision. Royal protection wasn't just about physical safety, it was about status, influence, and the complex hierarchy that governed palace life. His phone buzzed with a text from Camilla. Charles, we need to talk immediately. This humiliation is unacceptable. Reading her message, Charles felt the weight of 30 years of marriage colliding with his duties as monarch. The woman he loved had fundamentally misunderstood her role and responsibilities, forcing him to choose between personal loyalty and constitutional obligation. Sir Clive cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Majesty, there's another matter we need to discuss. The media has begun asking questions about the visible changes in security arrangements. What kind of questions? Royal correspondents have. Notice that Inspector Davies and Sergeant Thompson are no longer with the Queen Consort's detail. They're speculating about health concerns or family tensions. Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar pressure of trying to manage both family dynamics and public perception. Draft a statement about routine security reviews and enhanced protection for working royals with increased international duties. Already prepared, Your Majesty. However, the palace correspondents are particularly astute about reading between the lines of such statements. The king returned to his desk and opened the succession documents again, Camilla's annotations revealed. A troubling pattern of thinking about her role that went far beyond what she had ever discussed with him directly. She had been planning to position herself as a corrigant, with powers that would have been unprecedented for a queen consort. Sir Clive, I need you to arrange separate meetings with William and Catherine. They deserve to understand the full scope of what prompted these changes. Of course, Your Majesty. Should I also arrange for you to speak with the Queen Consort? Charles hesitated. Part of him wanted to have that conversation immediately, to explain his reasoning, and hopefully salvage their relationship. Another part recognized that Camilla's reaction to the morning's events would tell him everything he needed to know about her true priorities. Let's see how she responds to the new arrangements first. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Camilla paced in her sitting room, while Constable Williams stood uncomfortably by the door. The young officer was clearly out of his depth, having been thrust into protecting someone whose mood had grown increasingly volatile throughout the morning. I want you to contact Inspector Davies immediately, Camilla ordered. Your Majesty, Inspector Davies is no longer assigned to your protection detail, Williams replied carefully. He's been with me for 8 years. Surely he can spare a few minutes to explain what's happening. Williams shifted nervously. Ma'am, I believe Inspector Davies is currently briefing Princess Catherine on new security protocols. The reminder that her longtime protector was now serving Catherine sent another wave of fury through Camilla. She grabbed her phone and dialed Charles's private number, only to be transferred to his secretary's office. "His Majesty is in meetings regarding Commonwealth affairs," the secretary explained politely. "This is his wife calling about an urgent family matter," Camilla replied sharply. "I understand, Your Majesty, but His Majesty has specifically requested no interruptions during these particular meetings." Camilla ended the call, understanding that she was being managed and contained rather than consulted or informed. The isolation was as calculated as it was humiliating. She walked to her desk and began composing a formal letter to Charles, outlining her objections to the morning's changes and demanding an immediate reversal. But as she wrote, she realized that her protests would likely fall on deaf ears. Had built a compelling case against her, complete with evidence and documentation. Her thoughts turned to Catherine. It was undoubtedly meeting with enhanced security teams and receiving briefings about expanded responsibilities. The younger woman's innocent act wouldn't fool Camilla. Catherine understood palace politics better. Then she led on, and she was smart enough to have orchestrated this power shift while maintaining plausible deniability. Constable Williams received a radio communication and spoke quietly into his device before addressing Camilla. "Your Majesty, I've been informed that your afternoon appointments have been cancelled." "By whose authority?" "The changes are being made to accommodate the new security protocols, ma'am." Camilla realized that her schedule was no longer her own to control. Every appointment, every movement, every interaction was now subject to approval and oversight in ways that hadn't existed the day before. She returned to the window, watching as a motorcade prepared to leave the palace grounds. Through the bulletproof glass, she could see Catherine settling into the back seat of an armored Bentley, flanked by Inspector Davies and another protection officer. The sight of her former security team escorting her rival to what were probably Camilla's former duties was the final confirmation of her diminished status. But as she watched the motorcade disappear through the palace gates, Camilla's anger began transforming into something more dangerous: determination. If Charles wanted to play constitutional monarch rather than supportive husband, and if Catherine wanted to position herself as the future of the royal family, and Camilla would remind them both that she had spent decades learning how to navigate palace intrigue. The game was far from over, and Camilla Parker Bowles had not survived decades of royal scandal and public scrutiny only to be quietly sidelined when it suited someone else's ambitions. She picked up her phone and began making calls to allies, who might be very interested in hearing her side of the story. Catherine sat across from King Charles in his private study. The succession planning documents spread between them like evidence in a court case. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ornate room as the king explained the full scope of what had precipitated the morning's dramatic changes. "I had no idea Camilla was accessing these documents," Catherine said quietly, studying the handwritten annotations that revealed her stepmother-in-law's ambitious plans. Some of these suggestions would fundamentally alter the constitutional role of a queen consort. Charles nodded gravely. She was attempting to create precedents that could influence future arrangements. The constitutional implications are staggering. Catherine traced her finger along one of Camilla's notes, which suggested joint decision-making authority during any potential regency period. "When did you first become aware of this?" The palace archivist noticed documents had been accessed outside normal hours. Security cameras confirmed it was Camilla, using her access codes during times when she thought the offices would be empty. The betrayal in Charles's voice was unmistakable. Catherine had seen the king navigate political crises with steady composure. But this personal violation by his own wife had shaken him deeply. "Your Majesty, I need you to understand that I had nothing to do with any of this," Catherine said firmly. "I didn't request enhanced security, expanded duties, or access to restricted areas." Charles looked up from the documents, meeting her eyes directly. "I know that, Catherine. These changes weren't about rewarding you or punishing Camilla. They were about protecting the constitutional integrity of the monarchy. But that's not how it appears, and it's certainly not how Camilla will see it," Catherine replied. "I've essentially inherited everything she's lost. Her security team, her access privileges, her international responsibilities. The timing is unfortunate," Charles admitted. "But your expanded role was already being planned due to your successful handling of recent engagements. The UNESCO appointment was confirmed weeks ago." Catherine appreciated his honesty, but she also understood the political reality. Regardless of the timing or motivation, she was now positioned as Camilla's replacement in multiple areas of royal responsibility. "What happens now?" she asked. "You continue with your duties while we manage this family crisis as quietly as possible," Charles replied. "The monarchy must appear stable and unified, even when private relationships are strained." Catherine stood and walked to the window. Observing the palace gardens where additional security measures were clearly visible, "Your Majesty, I'm concerned about the long-term implications. Camilla isn't going to accept this quietly." "What do you mean?" "She's intelligent, well-connected, and has spent decades learning how to influence public opinion. If she decides to fight back, she has the tools to create serious problems for all of us." Charles joined her at the window, both of them watching as Inspector Davies conducted a security sweep of the garden perimeter. "You think she'll go public with her grievances?" "I think she'll do whatever she believes is necessary to restore her position," Catherine said carefully. "And that could include painting herself as a victim of palace politics, orchestrated by William and me." The king was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Catherine's political instincts had always been sharp, and her warning carried weight. "Sir Clive mentioned that royal correspondents are already asking questions," Charles said finally. "They'll dig until they find the real story. And when they do, the narrative could become very damaging very quickly." Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from William. "Emergency. Camilla has requested meetings with 3 senior royal correspondents." She showed the message to Charles, whose face darkened immediately. "She's moving faster than I expected. Your Majesty, we need to consider what stories she might tell," Catherine said urgently. "If she presents this as a power grab orchestrated by the younger generation, it could undermine public confidence in the succession." Charles reached for his phone to call Sir Clive, but Catherine placed her hand gently on his arm. "Before you respond, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared for this to get much worse, before it gets better?" The king met her gaze, seeing the steady resolve that had made her such a valuable member of the royal family. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Camilla has been planning this confrontation longer than we realized. Those annotations on the succession documents weren't spontaneous thoughts. They represent a comprehensive strategy she's been developing." Catherine moved to Charles's desk and pointed to specific sections of Camilla's notes. "Look at the detail here. She's researched historical precedents for expanded queen consort roles. She's identified legal arguments for joint authority during regency periods. This isn't the work of someone who stumbled into classified documents." The implication hit Charles like a physical blow. "You think this was deliberate? That she wanted to be caught?" "I think she wanted to force a confrontation that would allow her to present herself as being unfairly marginalized," Catherine explained. "By accessing these documents in ways that would be discovered, she created the crisis that gave her grounds to claim persecution." Charles sank into his chair, the weight of political manipulation by his own wife settling heavily on his shoulders. "If you're right, then the restrictions we imposed this morning played directly into her strategy." "Exactly. And now she's moving to the next phase by talking to journalists." Catherine's phone rang, displaying William's number. She answered on speaker with Charles's permission. "Father, Camilla has scheduled meetings with Rebecca Morrison from The Telegraph, James Henderson from The Times, and Sarah Phillips from The Mail," William said without preamble. "She's going public within hours." Charles stood abruptly. "On what grounds?" "Unknown. But her private secretary has described the meetings as setting the record straight about recent family developments." Catherine felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly the kind of calculated media strategy that had made Camilla such a formidable figure during her years as Charles's mistress and later as his wife. She understood public relations warfare better than almost anyone in the royal family. "We need to get ahead of this story," Catherine said. "If she controls the initial narrative, we'll spend months trying to correct the public record. What do you recommend?" Charles asked that Catherine look between the king and her phone, knowing that William was listening for a response. "We need to make a difficult choice. Either we allow Camilla to present her version of events unchallenged, or we authorize a coordinated response that reveals the constitutional issues that prompted these changes," That would mean making public the succession document breaches, William pointed out through the phone. Which is exactly what Camilla is counting on us being unwilling to do, Catherine replied. She's betting that we'll prioritize family privacy over public accountability. Charles walked to his window again, staring out at the increased security presence that had been necessitated by the morning's events. After a long moment, he turned back to Catherine with an expression of grim determination. Sir Clive is going to have a very busy afternoon, he said quietly. Catherine understood that the king had made his choice. The royal family was about to enter a public relations battle that would test every relationship and alliance within the monarchy. And she found herself positioned not just as a beneficiary of Camilla's downfall, but as a key strategist in the campaign to protect the constitutional integrity of the crown itself. The royal communications team worked frantically in the basement offices of Buckingham Palace as the afternoon crisis deepened. Rebecca Morrison from The Telegraph had already published her exclusive interview with Queen Camilla online, sending shockwaves through the establishment and forcing an immediate response from the palace. Sir? Clive Alderton coordinated damage control efforts while monitoring social media. Reactions to Camilla's explosive claims. The Queen Consort had painted herself as a victim of palace conspiracies, suggesting that younger royals had manipulated the king into restricting her access and transferring her responsibilities to Princess Catherine. Headline is devastating. Communications Director Sarah Chen reported grimly. Queen Camilla, I've been betrayed by those I trusted most. She's positioned this as a family coup orchestrated behind closed doors. King Charles sat at the head of the conference table, reading printouts of the interview with growing disbelief. Camilla had carefully avoided mentioning the succession documents, instead focusing on vague accusations of being excluded from decision-making and having her loyal staff reassigned without consultation. She's made it sound like Catherine actively campaigned for these changes, Charles observed, highlighting a particularly damaging passage. Listen to this. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you've mentored and supported work systematically to undermine your position within the family. Catherine, who had been silent throughout most of the briefing, finally spoke. She's not just attacking the palace's decisions. She's attacking my character and motives directly. William placed his hand on his wife's shoulder, his anger barely contained. She's accusing Catherine of manipulation and scheming while presenting herself as an innocent victim. Sir Clive pulled up social media analytics on his tablet. The public response is mixed but troubling. Camilla's supporters are rallying around the narrative of palace intrigue and generational conflict. There are already hashtags trending about protecting the Queen Consort from family politics. What about the other interviews? Charles asked. The Times piece will publish tonight, and the Mail's exclusive runs tomorrow morning, Sarah Chen replied. Based on advanced copies, she's expanded her accusations and provided more specific examples of alleged mistreatment. Catherine stood and moved to the window, trying to process the magnitude of the crisis unfolding around her. In a matter of hours, she had gone from being a respected working royal to being publicly accused of orchestrating a palace. A coup against the king's wife, Your Majesty. We need to make a decision about our response strategy, Sir Clive pressed. Every hour we remain silent allows Camilla's narrative to solidify in public perception. Charles looked around the room at his communications team, his son, and his daughter-in-law. The weight of choosing between family loyalty and institutional protection was visible in his expression. If we reveal the constitutional issues that prompted these changes, we expose Camilla to serious legal questions about her conduct, he said slowly. But if we don't, Catherine becomes the scapegoat for decisions she had no part in making. William countered firmly. Catherine turned back to the group. There's a third option we haven't discussed. What do you mean? Charles asked. I could step back from the enhanced responsibilities, Catherine said quietly. Return the expanded access. Reduce the security detail. Decline the international assignments. Remove myself as the apparent beneficiary of Camilla's restrictions. The silence that followed was deafening. William was the first to break it. Absolutely not. he said firmly. That would validate every accusation she's made and undermine your position permanently. But it might diffuse the immediate crisis, Catherine replied, and it would protect the monarchy from a prolonged public battle between the king and his wife. Sir Clive shook his head. Your Royal Highness, with respect, that strategy would be seen as an admission of guilt. It would confirm Camilla's accusations while doing nothing to address the underlying constitutional issues. Charles stood and began pacing, his constitutional training warring with his personal emotions. The monarchy has survived scandals before, but this is different. This is the king's wife publicly challenging decisions made for the protection of the institution. Sarah Chen's phone buzzed with urgent notifications. Sir, we have a problem. Camilla has just posted on her personal social media accounts something she's never done before. She read from her screen, After 30 years of service to the crown, I find myself sidelined and silenced. The truth will always emerge, no matter how powerful those who seek to suppress it. She's gone rogue, William said grimly. This isn't palace communications anymore. She's conducting her own public relations campaign. Catherine felt the walls closing in around her. Every option seemed to lead to more controversy and deeper family divisions. The woman she had tried to respect and work alongside was now actively destroying her reputation on a public stage. Your Majesty, she said. Addressing Charles directly, I need to ask you a direct question. Do you believe I manipulated these situations for my own benefit? Charles met her gaze steadily. No, Catherine. I believe you've been caught in circumstances beyond your control and are handling them with remarkable grace. Then we fight back, she said with quiet determination. Not with personal attacks or family drama, but with facts and transparency about why these decisions were necessary. Sir Clive looked between the king and Princess Catherine. That means revealing the succession document issues and Camilla's unauthorized access. I understand the implications, Catherine replied, but the alternative is allowing the monarchy to be damaged by false narratives and manipulated public opinion. Charles returned to his seat, the decision weighing heavily on him. If we go public with the constitutional violations, there's no going back. Camilla will face serious consequences, and our marriage may not survive. Your Majesty. Your marriage is already under attack, William pointed out gently. Camilla has chosen to wage this battle in public. We can't fight with one hand tied behind our backs. Catherine's phone showed dozens of missed calls from friends, charity organizations, and royal correspondents seeking her response to Camilla's accusations. The story was growing by the hour, and silence was being interpreted as guilt. Sir Clive, prepare a comprehensive response, Charles said finally. Full disclosure of the security review findings, the constitutional concerns, and the unauthorized access to classified documents. Sir, that's nuclear, Sarah Chen warned. It will devastate Camilla publicly. She chose the battlefield, Catherine said firmly. We're just choosing to fight back with the truth. As the communications team dispersed to prepare the palace's response, Catherine remained behind with Charles and William. The magnitude of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air. There's something else, Catherine said quietly. Once we release this information, Camilla will retaliate. She knows secrets about all of us, and she won't hesitate to use them. Charles nodded grimly. I know, but we've passed the point of quiet resolution. The institution must be protected, even from family members who would damage it for personal gain. The royal family was about to enter its most public and damaging internal conflict in decades, with Catherine positioned at the center of a battle she had never wanted to fight. But as she looked at the succession documents that had started this crisis, she understood that some fights were necessary to preserve the integrity of the crown itself. 3 weeks after the palace crisis began, Catherine stood in the same study where King Charles had first shown her the succession documents. But the atmosphere had completely transformed. The royal family's decisive response to Camilla's public accusations had shifted public opinion dramatically. Though not without significant personal costs, the palace's release of security footage, showing Camilla accessing classified documents, combined with expert testimony about constitutional violations, had effectively ended her credibility as a victim of palace politics. Legal scholars had publicly supported the king's actions, and even former critics acknowledged that the restrictions had been necessary to protect the monarchy's integrity. The Constitutional Review Board has completed its assessment, Sir Clive reported. Presenting Charles with the final documentation, they've concluded that the Queen Consort's actions represented the most serious breach of royal protocol in modern history. Charles accepted the report with weary resignation. The victory had come at an enormous personal price. Camilla had left Buckingham Palace 3 days earlier, taking up residence at her private estate in Wiltshire. While lawyers negotiated the terms of their separation, Catherine reviewed her expanded schedule, which now included the international responsibilities that had originally triggered the crisis. The UNESCO appointment had been confirmed, and her upcoming African diplomatic mission carried unprecedented authority for someone of her rank. Inspector Davies. How are the security preparations progressing? She asked her protection officer, who had adapted remarkably well to the dramatic changes of recent weeks. Excellent, Your Royal Highness. The enhanced protocols are functioning smoothly, and the team integration has been seamless. Davies replied professionally. William entered the study carrying newspapers that showed the continuing media coverage of what journalists had dubbed the royal reckoning. Public support for Catherine had grown significantly. Once the full scope of Camilla's constitutional violations became clear. Polling numbers are stabilizing, he reported to his father. Approval ratings for the monarchy actually increased once people understood the real reasons behind the changes. His attention focused on a letter from Camilla's solicitors outlining proposed terms for their formal separation. The legal document represented the end of a 30-year relationship that had survived public scandal, family opposition, and constitutional challenges, only to fracture over questions of loyalty and institutional integrity. Any response from her directly? Catherine asked gently, understanding the personal pain behind Charles's stoic facade. She released a final statement yesterday acknowledging that she misunderstood the boundaries of her role in apologizing for any damage to the monarchy. Charles replied quietly, "It was crafted by lawyers, but it closes the public chapter of this crisis." Catherine appreciated Camilla's final gesture, even while understanding its calculated nature. The apology provided face-saving cover for both sides, while acknowledging the seriousness of her violations without admitting criminal intent. What about her future status? William asked. She retained the title of Queen Consort, but with no active royal duties, Sir Clive explained. She'll receive appropriate financial support, but will have no official residence at royal properties. Arrangement represented a comprehensive exile from the royal world Camilla had fought so hard to join and influence. Her ambitions had ultimately destroyed the position she had sought to expand. Catherine's phone displayed a message from Princess Anne. Well handled. The monarchy is stronger for your courage during this crisis. The support from senior royals had been crucial in legitimizing the family's response to Camilla's accusations. Even those who had initially questioned the severity of the restrictions had come to understand their necessity once the full evidence emerged. Your Royal Highness, your car is ready for the children's hospital visit, Inspector Davies announced. Catherine gathered her materials, noting how routine these enhanced security measures had become. The increased protection that had once seemed overwhelming now felt natural, a reflection of her expanded role within the royal hierarchy. I'll see you tonight for the Commonwealth Representatives' dinner, she told Charles and William before leaving as her motorcade departed Buckingham Palace. Catherine reflected on the dramatic transformation of recent weeks. She had emerged from the crisis not as Camilla's replacement, but as a royal figure in her own right, with unprecedented authority and responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on her that Camilla's attempt to expand her own influence had instead accelerated Catherine's rise to become one of the monarchy's most powerful figures. The succession planning documents that had started the crisis now included provisions recognizing Catherine's central role in the institution's future. Inspector Davies sat in the front passenger seat, coordinating security for the hospital visit through his radio. The same professional dedication he had once provided to Camilla now protected Catherine, though without the undercurrent of constitutional concern that had marked his previous assignment. Your Royal Highness, the hospital administrators are particularly excited about your UNESCO Health Initiative presentation, he mentioned during a quiet moment in traffic. Catherine smiled, remembering when such international responsibilities had seemed impossibly distant from her role as a working royal. Now they represented the natural evolution of her expanding influence within the monarchy. Her phone showed messages from charity partners, government officials, and international organizations seeking her involvement in upcoming initiatives. The enhanced access and security that had been stripped from Camilla had opened doors that Catherine was only beginning to explore at the Children's Hospital. Catherine was greeted by crowds of supporters who had followed the royal crisis closely and admired her dignified response to Camilla's attacks. Signs reading "Thank you, Princess Catherine," and "Integrity Matters" showed public appreciation for her role in protecting constitutional principles. The Queen Consort was wrong to attack you, one well-wisher called out. You've always served with honor. Catherine acknowledged the support gracefully, while maintaining the diplomatic neutrality that had served her well throughout the crisis. She had never publicly criticized Camilla, focusing instead on her duties and allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Inside the hospital, she met with young patients and their families, the same kind of engagement that had originally demonstrated her suitability for expanded responsibilities. The natural warmth and genuine interest that had impressed royal observers for years now carried additional weight as evidence of her fitness for higher office. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital's chief administrator, presented Catherine with updates on programs supported by her charitable foundation. Your Royal Highness, the international recognition from your UNESCO role has increased funding for our research programs by 40%. Understood that her elevated status was creating opportunities that extended far beyond palace politics. The authority and access that Camilla had sought for personal aggrandizement was enabling Catherine to advance causes that genuinely mattered to her as she prepared to leave the hospital. Catherine received a final text message that brought the crisis full circle. It was from King Charles. Camilla has signed the separation agreement. The constitutional crisis is officially resolved. Standing in the hospital corridor surrounded by children and families whose lives had been touched by royal charitable work, Catherine felt the weight of responsibility that came with her. Transformation from supporting player to central figure in the monarchy's future, the royal guard had indeed stripped Camilla of palace access and reassigned her protection team to Princess Catherine. But the real victory wasn't about security arrangements or protocol violations. It was about demonstrating that the monarchy's institutional integrity would always take precedence over personal ambitions, no matter how high-ranking the person challenging those principles. Catherine's journey from target to triumph had established her not just as Camilla's successor, but as a royal figure capable of defending the crown itself when necessary. The crisis was over, but her real work was just beginning.